For over 200 years, a 4-page handwritten document has been the basis of our government and the foundation of our way of life, the Constitution of the United States. Most Americans have some idea about the fact that their individual rights and liberties are protected by it, but do you know there are 4 points in the Constitution that help keep our freedom safe and secure? In this video, you'll learn about those points and much more. But first, you'll hear from the local sponsor of this video and Congressman Tom Cole, the only enrolled tribal member in the U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Senate, who will explain Native Americans' unique status within the U.S. Constitution.
Hello, I'm Jewell James of the Lummi Indian Nation. The subject of this DVD, our country's Constitution, is important for all citizens to understand, not just as a historical document relating to our country's past, but one that lives today and continues to shape our future. Just like you, my everyday life is impacted by the U.S. Constitution. But mine is impacted in a unique way because I am both a citizen of the United States and an enrolled member of the Lummi Nation. The Lummi Indian Nation was directly involved in the introduction of the Iroquois resolutions that passed the U.S. Congress during the Constitution's 200th year celebration. Senate Concurrent Resolution 76 and House Concurrent Resolution 331 recognized the contributions the Iroquois and Choctaw Confederacies made to the development of constitutional popular sovereignty. The Congress recognized that the government-to-government relationship with the Indian tribes was structured by the Founding Fathers and incorporated that into the Constitution. The national government had plenary power to regulate Indian affairs, and the individual states surrendered such claims in the process of joining the Union. They entered on an equal footing with the original 13 states. Indian nations today want the U.S. government to adhere to the constitutional mandates that recognize the Indian nations as separate sovereigns, with jurisdiction over their tribal members and commerce. All elected officials, including the judicial branch, take an oath to honor and uphold the Constitution as supreme law of the land. Indian affairs is a matter of constitutional law, not individual choice. Few Americans realize the U.S. Constitution and American law do afford Native American tribes a unique degree of self-government over our lands and our tribal laws. This has helped us maintain our distinctive cultures, traditions, and ways of life. Our next guest, Congressman Tom Cole, the only enrolled tribal member in the U.S. House of Representatives and U.S. Senate, will explain more about this unique status. You will then hear from Caroline Kennedy, the author of several books about the U.S. Constitution, who will teach you more about this important document. At the end of the program, you'll also hear from Congressman Rick Larsen, our local representative in Congress. But first, let me introduce Congressman Tom Cole.
We're here today to talk about the unique status of Native Americans within the context of the American Constitution. This is a topic, frankly, that I spend a great deal of time working on here in the United States House of Representatives. From the very beginning, our founding fathers recognized that Indian nations were unique and sovereign entities, and the Constitution gives the Congress the right to regulate trade and commerce with foreign countries amongst the various states and with the Indian tribes. There's other mentions of Indian tribes in the Constitution as well. But you know, it wasn't just how our founding fathers wanted to treat Indians as sovereign entities, sovereign tribal nations, it's how Indians wanted to be treated as well. Indians didn't think of themselves racially. They thought of themselves, and they still do, tribally. They thought of themselves as Comanches, as Chickasaws, as Seminoles, as Iroquois, distinct with their own traditions, their own history, their own laws, and their own methods of governance. And they were very anxious that those laws, traditions, and methods of governance be preserved and maintained. Today, there are over 550 different Indian tribes in the United States of America. all of them very different, and frankly spread across the entire length and breadth of the country. Collectively, they control land about the size of Utah, which would actually make them bigger than 2/3 of the other countries in the world. The history of Native Americans and the American government has been a checkered one, to say the best. It's been a difficult relationship at many times. Today, Indians constitute the largest ethnic group, or they actually enlist at a higher rate, I should say, than any other ethnic group in the country in the armed forces of the United States. Today, the questions of sovereignty are every bit as important as they were 200 years ago. Over 5 million Americans claim Native American heritage, and over 2.5 million of them belong to recognized Indian nations. They continue to exercise a unique degree of self-governance. Many Indians think of themselves not only as citizens of the United States and citizens of the respective states in which they reside, but also as citizens of individual Indian nations. And they intend that that status be recognized and dealt with. Remember, when tribes signed treaties with the United States government, they always did so in exchange for certain rights and certain recognitions. It might be land, it might be mineral rights, it always involved a measure of self-government, it always involved a measure of federal responsibility in terms of things like education and health care. Those commitments too often have been neglected and forgotten about over the course of our history. And tribes, now stronger and more prosperous than ever, have been more and more insistent on seeing that their rights are recognized and honored under the treaties they've negotiated and under the Constitution of the United States. So the next time that you get the question, what sets Native Americans apart, they're the one people that retain a constitutionally recognized right of self-governance outside of the state and federal system. It's a unique status. It's actually unique in the world. Very few other countries treat indigenous peoples in the way the United States has chosen to do in its Constitution, in its laws, and in its court system. So I hope as you study, you learn more about the unique heritage of Native Americans, their extraordinary contributions to the United States of America, and their terrifically important and unique place in the Constitution of the United States. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Caroline Kennedy. It's not surprising to hear people say the president, senators, and representatives are the ones that hold political power in our country. But the truth is, it's not that simple. The real answer is here. The first 3 words of our Constitution tell us who's really in charge. We, the people. Senators, representatives, even presidents are in office temporarily. The power they have comes from the people who elect them. That's the way our system of government works, and it's based on this document written over 200 years ago. But how often do we Americans think about the way the Constitution supports our government, our democracy, in fact, our very lives?
I think about the Constitution pretty rarely.
I really don't think about it too much, really. I think I take it for granted.
I don't really think about it that much.
I think about it a little, but I wouldn't say very often.
I guess I don't really think of the Constitution that often.
Okay, so the Constitution may not be the first thing on everybody's mind. Still, it's a pretty remarkable document. After all, while just 4 pages long, for over 2 centuries now, it has secured our basic rights and freedoms. But before talking about them, let's review how our Constitution came about in the first place.
In the early 1780s, when there were 13 states in the country, what we call today the United States didn't exist. That's because there was no strong central government to hold the states together. After 4 years of independence, problems arose between the states. Some were serious enough to bring several close to war. So in 1787, delegates from the states got together in Philadelphia to see how they could strengthen their alliance and keep peace between them. After 4 months of discussion, disagreements, and compromises, the delegates produced the Constitution, and with it, they formed a new, more unified nation, the United States of America. Ours is the world's first complete written national constitution. It's based on the idea that political power belongs to the people who are governed. And since its creation, it's become a legal document copied by nations around the world. But it's not enough to be the first or the most copied. Our Constitution is unique in part because it sets up a system of government based on laws agreed upon by the people themselves. Back in 1787, this was a pretty revolutionary idea, especially when you compare it with governments where a monarch or an elite group enjoys complete power. Under those systems, some important rights, like freedom of speech, often didn't exist. The same goes for the right of a fair trial and the right to vote. In many cases, the rulers could, and often would, abuse power for their own benefit, putting in jail anyone who disagreed with them. And there was little people could do to protect themselves.
The American Constitution eliminated these threats. It made the law the supreme authority in the nation, making everyone subject to its rule. Still, creating our system of government took some ingenuity. To preserve peace and protect citizens, the U.S. Constitution deals with power in a special way that keeps our government strong, but not too strong. Now, there are 7 articles, or chapters as we might call them today, in the Constitution. The first 3 show how the power of the people will be handled by setting up a system we all learned about in grade school, called checks and balances.
Article 1 creates the lawmaking branch of our government, made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Article 2 creates the executive branch, headed by the President, whose job is to carry out laws made by the Congress, and also to recommend new laws for Congress to consider. Article 3 sets up the court system. The Supreme Court is the ultimate authority on legal decisions throughout the country and the laws passed by Congress. Back in 1787, the delegates believed that abuses of power could only be prevented by separating it among the 3 branches and allowing each branch to check the power of the other 2.
Mr. Speaker, 435 out of 435 members of Congress seem to agree that Americans need a tough crime bill.
As you know, Congress proposes laws which the President approves by signing or rejects by vetoing.
No. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 of those present having voted in the affirmative, the rules are suspended.
But with a 2/3 majority in both houses, the Congress can overcome the President's veto, making it a law. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court can strike down a law or a presidential action by declaring it unconstitutional. The Constitution also lays out the power-sharing relationship between the federal government and the states. But as innovative as the separation of powers is, our Constitution does more.
I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States. So help me God. So help me God.
The swearing in of a new president is cause for celebration, but not just because it represents the victory of one candidate over another. More importantly, it highlights another key feature of our Constitution, the transfer of power in an orderly way, without bloodshed. You can see how important this is by looking at history. For centuries, power has changed hands as the result of armed conflicts, costing countless lives. Today, we still see these conflicts occurring around the world. Preventing a violent transfer of power is what our Constitution has done from the beginning. And as a result, the freedom of the people, yours and mine, has been guaranteed.
What many people don't realize is that the Bill of Rights was not in the 1787 Constitution. It was added 2 years later, becoming the first 10 amendments. The reason was some of the Founding Fathers were concerned that the original Constitution didn't protect the rights of individuals, so they insisted on including these 10 amendments, which outline rights belonging to the people that the government cannot interfere with. Some rights were more important in colonial times than they are today. For example, the First Amendment right of free speech is more relevant than the Third Amendment right, preventing the government from forcing you to house soldiers in your home. Free speech is something we expect in our country, as well as the right to believe in and even promote any ideas, even if they're unpopular or controversial, and even if they criticize the government. Obviously, without the First Amendment, many changes in our nation that were based on free speech may not have ever come about, including the civil rights movement of the 1960s.
Somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest for right.
Another important right guarantees all citizens a fair trial. In fact, nearly 2/3 of the Bill of Rights deals with protecting people accused of a crime. You've heard them mentioned. They include the right to a fair trial, a trial by jury, freedoms from self-incrimination, and freedom from cruel and unusual punishments. At its core, the Bill of Rights safeguards the rights of individuals when they face the overwhelming power of the state. There's one other right that isn't a part of the Bill of Rights or the original Constitution, but is probably the most important of all, the right to vote. It was guaranteed by the 15th Amendment after the Civil War. With it, citizens have a voice in electing people who will uphold their rights. Without it, they're powerless to play a role in our democracy, which makes the right to vote perhaps the greatest right a citizen can have.
And with that, Mr. Speaker, I have no...
That's right. We can change the Constitution by amending it. That's important to know. In 1787, the delegates writing the Constitution were concerned with what was happening at the time, but they also looked ahead. They knew issues would come up in the future that they could never plan for. They wrote Article 5 so we could amend the Constitution, adding parts that correct, revise, or delete earlier sections. As with the Bill of Rights in 1789, amending the Constitution keeps it relevant to each era, whether it's outlawing slavery after the Civil War, granting women the right to vote in the 1920s, or 18-year-olds the right to vote in 1970. This gives each succeeding generation of Americans a chance to breathe new life into the Constitution, making it live for them as it has for those in the past. Unless you're planning a career in politics or the law, why bother worrying about preserving or protecting the Constitution? After all, our government's already in place, the system's running fine. Why worry about the right to free speech, a fair trial, the right to vote, or the separation of power? Well, just think about life without them.
In the Congo at the time, people were afraid of saying something against the political leaders for their own safety. You were not allowed to speak against them openly in public. It was dangerous at the time, you know. And just for yourself and for your family, it was better for you to stay in your corner and be quiet.
We did have a constitution for 50 years when Albania was a communist country, but there were basically no freedoms compared to freedom of speech and the right of the fair trial. And it was absolutely prohibited to speak against the party.
It's been said that if people were angels, we wouldn't need governments to survive. But as history has shown, governments are necessary. Our system of government, our freedoms, and our way of life all come from our Constitution. They guarantee our democracy. We may complain about it, but as Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst form of government, except for all the other that have ever been tried. At the core of our Constitution are the rights to vote, to free speech, to a fair trial, along with a three-way separation of power. These are the foundation of our American democracy. Without the Constitution, our democracy would be weaker. What's more, we could be subjected to sudden and violent change that would disrupt our educational institutions, our economy, and our legal system, which work together to make our country strong.
Hopefully you're seeing the Constitution in a new way. Not as an old document belonging to history, but a living document that protects your freedom and your way of life every day.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
I'm very fond of those words spoken by my father during his inaugural speech in 1961. They reflect his vision for America and his gratitude for the privilege of serving the people of this country. As with other members of our family, he felt there was no greater responsibility than public service, and to him there was no greater reward. Each of us as Americans has a responsibility too. It may not involve a commitment to public life, but it does involve understanding the principles of our democracy. And it starts with knowing the basics of our Constitution and exercising our right to vote. For without knowing these basics, we risk losing more than our rights. We're fortunate to live in the greatest country on earth. We need to make the most of what we've been given by our parents and earlier generations of Americans. A system of government based on the rule of law, a nation conceived in liberty, and a democracy of the people, by the people, and for the people. For me, the day I feel most proud to be an American is not the 4th of July, it's Election Day. That's when each of us has a say in what kind of America we want to create in the future. In 1960, when my father was running for president, if one person in every precinct had voted the other way, he would have lost the popular vote. I used to think of that as a statistic from the past, until the election of 2000. We all saw the Constitution in action, and we all learned firsthand that every vote counts. The Constitution gives us the right to vote. If we care about our families, our future, our communities, and our country, we have to use it. I'm Caroline Kennedy. Thanks for watching.
Hi, I'm Congressman Rick Larson, and I represent Washington's 2nd Congressional District, which includes parts of Snohomish, Skagit, and Whatcom counties, and all of Island and San Juan counties. It is an honor to represent such a beautiful part of the country where I, like many of you, was born and raised. And I'm pleased to be part of this video about our Constitution. The Constitution is an incredible document that lays out the vision of a democratically governed nation. It is just as important today as it was when it was written 225 years ago. This DVD also includes a discussion of the unique constitutional status of Native Americans. Northwest Washington is home to many Indian tribes, and it is important to understand the unique rights and responsibilities that Indians in the United States have. Now, as you learn more about the Constitution and our system of government, remember that ultimately the power rests with you. We in Congress are your elected officials, and it is our duty to listen to you and to represent your interests. I'm here to serve you. So thanks for taking the time to learn a bit more about the Constitution and your role in governing the nation. Thank you.
Once again, I would like to thank you for watching this video. We at the Lummi Indian Nation believe that programs like these are important to creating an informed public that values our rights and freedoms. This begins with the knowledge of our Constitution, a document we have seen that not only has history behind it, but a future ahead of it. On behalf of all of us, thank you.